Let's jump right into this explainer. For a lot of us, the book of Judges has been completely misunderstood. We tend to treat it like this ancient highlight reel of superheroes, just a collection of inspiring stories about people with, let's face it, very unusual careers. But we really need to tear that misconception down right out of the gate. Judges is absolutely not a superhero comic. It's a vivid, profound theological diagnosis of a deeply broken community. It's a mirror held up to human failure, and it perfectly sets the stage for the only king who can actually save us. So, we have to ask ourselves, is the book of Judges just some sort of leadership manual? Well, if we try to read it as a guide on how to become better versions of guys like Gideon, Jephthah, or Samson, we end up with a seriously twisted and alarming guide. You'd get a manual packed with catastrophic vows, profound moral disorder, and completely disastrous endings. The book literally refuses to give us human heroes who can bear the massive weight of salvation. Instead, what we're actually looking at is a theological diagnosis of a broken people. Israel essentially swapped out the living God for cheap idols. And what's truly terrifying here is that a whole generation grew up inheriting all the religious vocabulary of their parents, but they possessed zero actual biblical confidence in God. They had all the shiny accessories of religion, but they completely abandoned Jehovah. Their core issue wasn't that they were ignorant, it was flat-out idolatry. Which brings us to this agonizing, inescapable loop that humanity just gets hopelessly stuck in. It's the relentless drumbeat of the entire book. First, the people sin. Then, God gives them over to oppression. In their distress, they cry out. God graciously raises up a deliverer, which brings some temporary rest. But literally the second that judge dies, the people don't just slip up, they turn right back around and act even more corruptly than before. And the cycle aggressively starts all over again. Just look at how God uses these utterly flawed deliverers. Take Gideon, for instance. There's some genuine comedy here, honestly. When the angel of the Lord appears to him, Gideon is not standing on a mountaintop declaring his fierce allegiance. He is literally hiding in a winepress trying to thresh wheat. And yet, God calls this guy a mighty man of valor. How does Gideon respond? He basically files a theological complaint report. He demands to know where all the miracles went. The guy is completely devoid of confidence, and yet God incredibly patiently works through his profound weakness. But Gideon's story is also this massive warning sign. When it's finally time for battle, God deliberately, almost absurdly, shrinks Gideon's army down to just 300 men. Why? Well, God tells us exactly why in Judges chapter 7, verse 2. "Lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, 'Mine own hand hath saved me.'" Honestly, that sentence should be permanently engraved on the human ego. God brilliantly orchestrates the victory to completely crush human pride and surgically remove any possible chance of us boasting in our own strength. As the history marches on, we enter some much darker territory. We meet Abimelech. This is a man whose deliciously grim, murderous ambition drives him to slaughter his own brothers just to seize power. He is the ultimate anti-king, the poster child for total self-exaltation. Now contrast that ruthless ambition with Jesus, the true king. Abimelech claws his way up to power by killing his enemies. Jesus? He voluntarily descends into the deepest humiliation, even death on a cross, specifically to save his enemies. The contrast just could not be sharper. Then there's Jephthah, just another complicated, totally broken deliverer. Jephthah manages to win a military victory, sure, but then he makes this tragic, manipulative, and absolutely catastrophic vow to God. He basically treats the Almighty like someone you can haggle with at a flea market. This profound moral compromise proves definitively that these human deliverers simply cannot carry the weight of salvation. They're heavily tainted by the exact same brokenness they're supposed to be rescuing Israel from. And then there's Samson. We all know about his brute strength, but really analyze the supreme irony of this guy. He can literally tear a lion apart with his bare hands. But emotionally, he has the maturity of a toddler. He's entirely driven by lust, vengeance, and impulse. Samson's life is a blaring siren warning us never to confuse spiritual gifts with actual godliness. When we starkly contrast him with Jesus, it takes your breath away. Samson has physical strength, Jesus has absolute divine authority. Samson fails morally at every single turn. Jesus walks in flawless, sinless obedience. Samson's deliverance was temporary, Jesus' salvation is eternal. As we track the generations of these judges, the progressive darkening of the book becomes impossible to ignore. We start out with Othniel, who is a fairly straightforward deliverer, but then we just spiral downward. Gideon ends up building an idol, Jephthah makes that terrible vow, Samson is a complete moral disaster. Until finally, the society violently collapses into a horrifying civil war. This is exactly what happens when the covenant community forgets God. The social order doesn't just bend a little, it completely shatters. Which brings us to the literary thunderclap of the entire book. Judges chapter 21, verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Let that just linger heavily for a moment. This is a terrifying reality. The people didn't necessarily wake up saying, I'm going to do evil today. They just did what seemed right to them. They became their own absolute, unquestioned moral authority. Listen, when the prevailing culture shifts to, I decide what is right, we are looking at the ultimate disaster of self-rule. When everyone becomes their own final authority, society doesn't suddenly become wonderfully liberated and free. It becomes profoundly, violently dangerous. Human beings desperately need righteous rule, but even more than that, we need hearts that are transformed by grace. External laws just aren't enough when the internal compass is totally shattered. So the absolutely crucial point is this: we must pivot sharply from all this human failure straight to divine faithfulness. The entire Old Testament begs one ultimate question: who is the king who will never fail? Because even the greatest kings, like David, eventually sinned and they eventually died. The throne was left empty. The question just keeps getting larger and larger. The answer, beautifully and emphatically, is Jesus. Jesus perfectly succeeds where every single human judge miserably failed. He is the true deliverer. He's the sinless savior, where the judges were flawed. He's the permanent deliverer, where they were completely temporary. He is the risen Lord, where the judges died and stayed buried. And he is the faithful covenant keeper, where Israel repeatedly broke their promises. And Jesus is the righteous judge. In John chapter 5, verse 22, we read, For neither doth the Father judge any man, but he hath given all judgment unto the Son. Now there is incredible comfort here for the believer. The judge who holds the absolute authority to condemn the world is the exact same Savior who willingly stepped down to bear our condemnation on the cross. Think about that. Your judge is your justifier. Because of this amazing truth, the gospel permanently reverses that agonizing cycle we see in Judges. Jesus does not merely offer us some temporary relief from external enemies, only to leave us sitting around waiting for the next crisis. No, he offers decisive, eternal redemption from the absolute dominion of sin and death. He doesn't just manage our circumstances for a while. He accomplishes our complete, eternal salvation. And he does this by changing us from the inside out. Back in Judges, we see a man named Micah who has all the idols, the religious objects, even his own personal priest. It looks incredibly religious on the surface, but underneath, it is profoundly corrupt. It's religion without God. We really have to be warned against confusing religious activities, vocabulary, and shiny accessories with genuine, spirit-led reconciliation with God. True Christ-centered faith isn't about drumming up religious enthusiasm. It's about a fully transformed heart. I really want to speak directly to you right now. If you look at your own life and you see those same repetitive cycles of failure, please know this: God's astonishing grace operates precisely in the midst of our deepest failures. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 proclaims, But God commendeth his own love toward us, in that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus didn't wait until humanity got its act together to save us. He came specifically for the weak, the fearful, and the rebellious. That right there is the supreme encouragement found hidden in the dark pages of this book. God just keeps coming back. Israel keeps wandering off into the exact same disasters over and over, and God relentlessly responds with this overwhelming covenantal love. Our repeated wandering is absolutely no match for God's mercy. Yes, your weakness is very real, but Christ's strength is infinitely greater. Our faithlessness does not and cannot cancel out his faithfulness. So we conclude with this magnificent anchor of absolute stability. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8 declares, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today, yea, and forever. In a world full of chaos and instability, where leaders inevitably fall, where emotions constantly change, and where everyone simply does what is right in their own eyes, Jesus remains. So the question I'll leave you with is this: are you still trying to be your own deeply flawed deliverer? Or are you ready to rest completely in the glorious sufficiency of the true King? This has been a summary explainer of these incredible truths, and I highly encourage you to dive much deeper. You'll find a link to the fuller discussion right down there in the description. Keep your eyes on the true King.